Yeah, very good afternoon to one and all. Yesterday we came to know that the formation of sedimentary rocks. So in which there are three stages to form the sedimentary rocks. First one is weathering and erosion of pre-existing rocks. Second one, sedimentation. And third stage is lithification and diagenesis. So here generally the diagenesis includes again three processes. As we know, the first stage, weathering and erosion of pre-existing rocks. Second one, sedimentation. And the third one, lithification and diagenesis. So in the third stage, lithification and diagenesis. So in the process, lithification is a process of soft and loose sediments convert into hard and firm rocks. Yes. So this is called consolidation. So during this process, many physical and chemical changes takes place within the sediments. So such changes are called the diagenetic changes. So these processes called as diagenesis. So in the diagenesis, it includes again three processes. They are compaction, cementation, and recrystallization. Compaction, cementation, and recrystallization. See, in this process, which one? Lithification and diagenesis process. So in the diagenesis process, again, three processes which are included. They are compaction, cementation, and recrystallization. Compaction occurs when the weight of overlying layers compresses the sediments below. Compaction అంటే బాగా ఒత్తిపట్టి ఉంచడం, compaction చేయడం, press చేయడం బాగా. Compaction occurs when the weight of overlying layers compress the sediments below. So whatever the sediments which are deposited in the site of deposition, so these sediments are compacted by the overlying layers. So as the grains of sediments are pressed closer and closer together, there is considerable reduction in pore space and volume. So fine grained sediments such as clays are consolidated more effectively by this process. So due to compaction, what happens? So any spaces are there. So the sediment grains, the grains of sediments are pressed closer and closer together. These sediments are due to the compaction. So they are pressed closer and closer together. So there is a considerable reduction in the space between the grains and volume, reduction of volume. Mostly fine grained sediments such as mostly clay particles are consolidated more effectively by this compaction process. And second one, cementation. So when water circulates through the pores of coarse grained sediments, dissolved mineral matter is precipitated between the grains, which cause cementation. So here, so when water circulates through the pores of coarse grained sediments, so whatever the dissolved mineral matters is precipitated between the grains. They are precipitated between the grains, which cause cementation. So the most common cementing materials are silica, calcium carbonate, iron oxides, and clay minerals. The most common cementing materials are silica, calcium carbonate, iron oxides, and clay minerals. So the identification of the cementing material is a relatively simple matter. So calcite cement will effervesce with the dilute hydrochloric acid, while iron oxide gives the rock a characteristic red or orange or yellow color silica or yellow color. So the calcite cementing will be effervescent with the dilute hydrochloric acid, while iron oxides gives the rock a characteristic red or orange or yellow color. And silica, the hardest of the cements, produces the hardest sedimentary rocks. See, all these different type of cementing materials which bound the sediments within the cementing material. Last one, crystallization, or we can say recrystallization. Okay. Although the most sediments rocks are lithified, yes, although most of the sediment rocks are lithified by compaction, cementation, or combination of both. Some are consolidated chiefly by the recrystallization of their constituents. Chemically formed rocks such as limestones, dolomites, salt, and gypsum are the examples of the rocks consolidated by recrystallization. See, chemically formed rocks such as limestones, they are the chemical solutions that is dissolved in water. The mineral constituents, they are dissolved in the water. So these chemically formed rocks, isn't it? Generally, the consolidated chiefly by recrystallization of their constituents. So chemically formed rocks such as limestones, dolomites, salt, and gypsum are the examples of the rocks consolidated by recrystallization. Recrystallization. So these dissolved chemical constituents or these dissolved mineral matters are the sediment rocks consolidated by recrystallization. Where recrystallization. So this is the formation of sedimentary rocks. Formation of sedimentary rocks. Majorly 3 steps. First one is weathering and erosion of sedimentary rocks. Pre-existing rocks. Second one, sedimentation. Third one, lithification and diagenesis. In this diagenesis, again 3 processes are there. They are compaction, cementation, and recrystallization. So by this process, chemically, physical changes are occurred in the sediments. Then, second unit we will see sediment rocks properties. So once we observe the sediment rocks properties, sediment rocks are very different from the other igneous and metamorphic rocks. As we know, sediment rocks are found chiefly as a most extensive cover over the continents. So it's occupied about 5%. 5% total amount of rock occupied 5%, and it's occurred from the Earth's surface. It's about 16 kilometers. The sediment rocks are occurred about 16 kilometers in the Earth crust, and mostly these are consolidated rocks, which are most source for the availability of fossils. The sediment rocks are the very chief resource for the fossil assemblies. So once we observe the classification of different rock properties, sediment rocks are having different characteristic features. So once we observe the classification of sediment rocks, so the sediments from which sediment rocks are formed may be divided into 2 major groups. They are the clastic sediment rocks and non-clastic sediment rocks. So once we observe the classification of sediment rocks, clastic sediment rocks and non-clastic sediment rocks. So let us see first one, clastic sediments or clastic sediment rocks. Clastic sediments are the broken fragments of pre-existing rocks, ranging in size from minute clay particles to very large boulders. So what are the clastic sediments or what are the clastic sediment rocks. So clastic sediments means nothing but I already told that rock pieces or weathered fragments. Okay. So clastic sediments are the broken fragments. Clastic sediments are the broken fragments of pre-existing rocks, ranging in size from a minute clay particles to very large boulders. So generally they are the very large fragment, large size, various size ranging from minute clay particles to very large boulders. Clastic rocks are formed by the mechanical accumulation. Clastic rocks are formed by the mechanical accumulation of grains of plastic sediments, isn't it? So generally, depending upon the size, constrained grains, the clastic rocks are classified into three major groups. They are Audacious Rocks, Carbonaceous Rocks, and Argilaceous Rocks. The clastic sediment rocks are again classified into three types of rocks. They are Audacious Rocks, Carbonaceous Rocks, and Argilaceous Rocks. So clastic sediment rocks are the broken fragments of pre-existing rocks, ranging from minute clay particles to very large boulders. Okay. So these clastic rocks are formed by the mechanical accumulation of grains of sediments or plastic sediments, depending upon the size. As I already told that there are size varieties or size varies from minute to large boulders. It means they are varying in size. So based on the size, the clastic rocks are again further classified into three types. They are Audacious Rocks, Carbonaceous Rocks, and Argilaceous Rocks. Okay. First, let us see the first one, Audacious Rocks. These rocks are formed accumulation of bigger rocks. These rocks are formed by accumulation of bigger rocks fragments such as gravels, pebbles, and boulders. The Audacious rocks are formed by accumulation of bigger particles such as gravels, pebbles, and boulders. If the grains are rounded, the rock is called conglomerate. So within these, if the rock is formed by a large fragments, accumulation of a bigger fragments such as gravels and pebbles and boulders. If the rock is rounded in shape, if the grains are rounded, not rock, if the grains are rounded, the rock could be said conglomerate. And if they are angular, the rock is termed as breccia. So it means there are two major examples for the Audacious rocks. One is conglomerate and another one is breccia. So if the rock consisting grains are round in shape, then the rock can be said conglomerate. If the grains are angular in shape, the rock is termed as breccia. Okay. Then next, coming to second types of good, Carbonaceous rocks. So these rocks are composed almost entirely of sand grains. When individual grains are rounded, the rock is called sandstone. And grit if the grains are angular. See, there are different type of Carbonaceous rocks are there. The size variation is about almost sand size. sand grains. The accumulation of almost entirely of the sand grains. When these individual grains or such a type of rocks are called Argilaceous rocks. Carbonaceous rocks. But when these individual grains are rounded, then the rock is termed as sandstone. When the individual grains or sand grains are angular, then the rock could be then the rock is said to be a grit. So example for Argilaceous rocks means sand size. The grain size is sand size. So the accumulation of rounded grains, the accumulation of the rock is composed entirely of rounded grains, rounded sand grains, then the rock termed as sandstone. When the individual sand grains are angular in shape, then the rock is said to be grit. Then the third group of rocks, argillaceous rocks. Okay, argillaceous rocks. As we know, so these rocks are made up of very fine grained. These rocks are made up of very fine grained sediments. So the best example is shale and mudstone are typically argillaceous rocks, which are composed of clay-sized sediments. So clay, as we know, very fine grained. As I already told that the sediment rocks are formed by the minute clay particles. From minute clay particles to the bigger size boulders. Okay, so that is why the argillaceous rocks are the rocks which are composed of fine sediments or clay sediments, clay-sized sediments, which are called argillaceous rocks. The best example is shale and mudstone. Shale and mudstones are the very good example for the argillaceous rocks. So here there are some clastic rocks which do not fit into the above said classification. They require consideration of a mineral composition. For example, when appreciable quantities of feldspar are present in a sandstone, then the rock is called as arkose. When the sandstone contains a appreciable quantity of clay as well as angular quartz grains, then the rock is called gravity. So in addition, there are many clastic rocks which contain grains of more than one size. For example, a rock containing a mixture of sand and silt may be classified as sandy siltstone or silty sandstone, depending upon which particle size dominates. If the sand mixed with the sand and silt particles, if sand is dominating particles, and sand, we can call it as sandy siltstone. So if the silt particles are dominating, silty sandstone, isn't it? Sand is sandstone, sand is siltstone, and silty sandstone, like that. We can call it as when the combination of mixture of sand and silt and clay, like that. And we can call it as a clay like that. So when the combination of such type of rocks, we can call it as by mixing the two names. So which is dominating particles, the applicable particles, and rest of the name as a suffix. Okay. Next, non-clastic sediment rocks. Yes, as I already told that sediment rocks are broadly classified into two types: clastic sediment rocks and non-clastic sediment rocks. So clastic sediment rocks are based on size. Again, there are three types: audacious rocks, carbonaceous rocks, and argillaceous rocks. Okay. Next, second category, non-clastic sediment rocks. Non-clastic sedimentary rocks. So here, the non-clastic rocks includes those sediment rocks which are formed by chemical precipitation of minerals from water or by accumulation of remains of animals and plants. Non-clastic sediments means, plastic means sediment, plastic means pieces, detritus. Okay. Non-clastic means there is no sediments, there is no fragments, there is no fragment, there is no pieces, there is no detritus. So it means they are purely dissolved in condition. Whatever the materials or whatever the minerals, they are purely dissolved in water. So the non-clastic rocks include those sediment rocks which are formed by the chemical precipitation of minerals, chemical precipitation of minerals from water, or by accumulation of remains, or by accumulation of remains of plants and animal organisms. So they are classified into again two groups: chemically formed rocks and organically formed rocks. Chemically formed rocks and organically formed rocks. As we know, it is very clearly, the name itself indicating. Chemically formed rocks. Chemically rock formed means the minerals which are dissolved in water. So they are chemically formed rocks. Organically formed rocks means the organic materials are dissolved in water. So both are which are include the formation formed by the precipitation. Isn't it? Chemically precipitation of minerals. Chemically precipitation of minerals. Let us see the first one. Chemically formed rocks. Chemically formed rocks. See, these rocks are formed when mineral matter is in solution, is precipitated from water, usually because of changes in water temperature or in the chemical content of water. Such chemical sediments are derived from the dissolution of materials from older rocks and immense older rocks, and subsequently transportation of dissolved chemical substances into a sea or lake. On the basis of composition, the chemically formed rocks are classified several types. As we know, the chemically formed rocks. So the chemically formed rocks, when the mineral matter in solution is precipitated from water. So usually because of changes in water temperature or in the chemical content of water. So such chemical sediments are derived from the dissolution of materials from older rocks and subsequent transportation of dissolved chemical substances into a sea or lake. On the basis of composition, the chemically formed rocks are classified several types. They are carbonate rocks, salt rocks, ferruginous rocks, siliceous rocks. There are four types: carbonate rocks, salt rocks, ferruginous rocks, and siliceous rocks. See, let us see the first one, carbonate rocks. Carbonate rocks, limestones and dolomites. Limestones and dolomites are the most abundant carbonate rocks. They are formed by the chemical precipitation of calcium carbonate from seawater. The chemical precipitation of calcium carbonate from seawater. So they are the carbonate rocks. Why? Because if you take the chemical composition of limestone, CaCO3, calcium carbonate. You see the chemical composition of dolomite rock, CaMgCO3, calcium magnesium carbonate. So they are the carbonate rocks. So these carbonate rocks are formed by the chemical precipitation. The chemical precipitation of calcium carbonate from the seawater. Seawater nundi calcium carbonate అనేది precipitate కావడం వల్ల seawater, oceanic water కావచ్చు, sea water కావచ్చు, సముద్రపు నీరు ఎక్కువ బాగా ఉంటుంది. సో ఓషానిక్ వాటర్ మోస్ట్లీ, సీ వాటర్. సో కెమికల్ precipitation of calcium carbonate from sea water, we may get the limestone and dolomites. Next, salt rocks. See, the evaporation is a major process. Evaporation is a major process involved in the deposition of chemical precipitation. So evaporation is a major process involved in the deposition of chemical precipitates. Deposition of chemical precipitates. The salt deposits formed by the evaporation of saline lakes are called the evaporites. So generally, the precipitation. So salt rocks which are formed by the evaporation process. So that is why evaporation is a major process involved in the deposition of chemical precipitates. So deposition of chemical precipitates. Due to the evaporation, the chemical constituents are precipitates. The chemical precipitates deposition of due to the involved the evaporation process involved in the deposition of chemical precipitation. Chemical precipitation. See, the salt deposits formed by the evaporation of saline lakes are called the evaporites. The salt deposits formed by the evaporation of saline lakes. Saline lakes are called the evaporites. The principal minerals of these deposits are chlorides and sulfates. Chlorides and sulfates of sodium, potassium, magnesium and calcium. Chlorides and sulfates, magnesium chloride, sodium chloride, potassium sulfates, like that. Sulfates and chlorides, sulfates and chlorides of sodium, magnesium, potassium and calcium. Rock salt, gypsum, rock salt, gypsum and anhydrites are by far the most abundant minerals of evaporative mines. So what are the examples for salt deposits or salt rocks? Rock salt nothing but రాతి ఉప్పు అంటాం. ఉప్పు అంటాం, రాతి ఉప్పు అన్న ఒకటి సముద్ర ఉప్పు అంటే మనం ఇళ్ళల్లో వాడుతుంటాం కదా, మెత్తటి ఉప్పు కాకుండా గల్ల ఉప్పు ఉంటుంది కదా, దట్ ఈస్ రాక్ సాల్ట్, రాతి ఉప్పు అంటాం. NaCl, sodium chloride, is chemical composition. Rock salt, gypsum, as you usually know, gypsum, and anhydrite, gypsum CaSO4 CaSO4 gypsum, anhydrite CaSO4 calcium sulfates. So that is why chlorides and sulfates of sodium, potassium, magnesium and calcium are the major constituent elements in the rock salt deposits. So they commonly form a massive beds. So these are the best examples for salt rocks. So salt rocks are this evaporation process. Evaporation is a major process in which the deposition of chemical precipitates. So these are the salt rocks. Then coming to third one, ferruginous rocks. So this group includes those rocks which are formed by the chemical precipitation of iron oxides. These rocks mostly includes these rocks which are formed by the chemical precipitation of iron oxides. Such rocks contain a high proportion of iron bearing minerals such as siderite. So such rocks are having mostly the abundance of iron bearing minerals. The high proportion of iron bearing minerals such as siderite, hematite, chamosite, and pyrite. So such rocks contain a high proportion of iron oxides. High proportion of iron bearing minerals. What are the iron bearing minerals? Siderite, hematite, magnetite, chamosite, and pyrite. If you see the chemical composition of siderite, FeCO3, iron carbonate, isn't it? Like even hematite, Fe2O3, magnetite, Fe3O4. Iron is a major proportion, isn't it? So iron stones is an example for the ferruginous rocks. Iron stones are the very good example for the ferruginous rocks. Then last one, siliceous deposits. Siliceous deposits. The siliceous rocks are formed when silica is precipitated from water. When silica is precipitated from water. Examples of such deposits are flint, chert, jasper, and agate. So in silica deposits, in which the rocks are formed in which silica is precipitated from the water. Examples, these deposits are mostly the flint, chert, jasper, and agate. So these are the major deposits of siliceous deposits abundant in silica. So because of silica precipitation from the water. So this is a type of rocks which are best example for the siliceous deposits. Chert, flint, jasper, and agate. Okay. So these are the 4 types of rocks includes in chemically formed rocks or chemically non-plastic sediment rocks. Chemically non-plastic sediment rocks. So non-plastic rocks are broadly 2 types. Chemically formed rocks and organically formed rocks. So chemically formed rocks again, based on the chemical composition, there are 4 types: carbonate rocks, salt rocks, ferruginous rocks, and siliceous rocks. Okay, carbonate rocks best example, limestone and dolomite. Salt rocks best example, rock salt, gypsum, and anhydrite. And ferruginous rocks best example, iron stones. And siliceous rocks or siliceous deposits best example, chert, flint, jasper, and agate. Okay. Next, coming to second category, organically formed rocks. Organically formed rocks. So these rocks are composed mainly of remains of plants and animals. Remains of plants and animals. Organically formed rocks subdivided into 2 groups: biochemical rocks and organic rocks. Biochemical rocks and organic rocks. Biochemical rocks, the biochemical sediments is produced when plants and animals living under water extract from it dissolved mineral matter, usually calcite, to form shells or other hard pots. These shells accumulates on the ocean floor in great quantities to form sedimentary rocks. An example of the biochemical rocks is shell limestone or shelly limestone. So biochemical rocks in which the biochemical sediments is produced when plants and animals living underwater extract from it dissolved mineral matter. So usually calcite, CaCO3, calcium carbonate, usually calcite. So this calcite is mostly from shells of organisms or other hard pots. Best example, shelly limestone. Okay, these are also, you can call it as carbonate rocks. Then Organic rocks containing organic matter belongs to a group. An example of such rocks is coal. This is, you can call it as carbonate rocks. Carbonate rocks. C. So mostly belong to this group. An example of such rock is coal. So these are also called the carbonaceous rocks. Carbonaceous rocks. So these are the very good examples for the rocks which are formed only where it is going to take place. In order to take place, in what conditions the rocks are going to form. So all these rocks which gathered in various parameters they are going to form. So what are the major constraint precipitation? And what are the major constraint components which are present in the rock? So based on that, there are the several types. So this is about second unit, properties of sedimentary rocks or sedimentary rocks properties. Sedimentary rocks are broadly classified into two types: plastic sedimentary rocks and non-plastic sedimentary rocks. Plastic rocks ante weathered fragments. స్థూల పరిమాణంలో ఉన్నటువంటి శిలలు సూక్ష్మ పరిమాణంలో విడగొట్టడం వల్ల ఏమైతే మనకు చిన్న చిన్న శిలా ముక్కలు, రాతి ముక్కలు ఏర్పడతాయి. ఆ రాతి ముక్కల కలయిక వల్ల ఏర్పడినటువంటివి ప్లాస్టిక్ సెడిమెంటరీ రాక్స్. అంటే ప్లాస్టిక్స్ అంటే ఏంది? ప్రోడక్ట్స్, వెదర్డ్ ప్రోడక్ట్స్ ఆర్ పీసెస్. ఓకే, ఈ పీసెస్ అన్ని కూడా కలిసి సిమెంటేషన్ కావడం వల్ల, ఇజంట్ ఇట్, ఇవన్నీ కూడా సిమెంటేషన్ కావడం వల్ల, లేదంటే కంపాక్షన్ కావడం వల్ల, లిథిఫికేషన్, డయాజెనిసిస్ జరగడం వల్ల ఇవన్నీ మనకు బికేమ్ sedimentary rocks. Such type of sedimentary rocks are called as plastic sedimentary rocks. So they are very huge, various size. Their size is various, from minute clay particles to a large, up to a large boulders. So based on the size, they are again further classified into three types. They are Audacious rocks, Arenaceous rocks, Audacious rocks, Arenaceous rocks, and Argilaceous rocks. Audacious rocks best example, conglomerate and breccia. So conglomerate grains in the conglomerate grains are rounded in shape, so that the round grains present in a rock, such type of rock from Audacious is called as conglomerate. If the rock is angular, grains are composed, then the rock termed as breccia. Conglomerate and breccia, these are two of the best examples for Audacious rocks, having a very coarse grain boulders and gravels or pebbles. Then second one, Arenaceous rocks. Arenaceous means sand size. Sand particle size మనం Arenaceous rocks అంటాం. So ఇందులో కూడా sand, if the sand grains are rounded in shape, if the sand grains are rounded, then the rock termed as sandstone. Okay. If the rock grains are angular, then the rock termed as grit. So sandstone and grit are the best example for Arenaceous rocks. Okay. See, the last one, Argilaceous rocks. Argilaceous rocks are formed by the fine clay sediments. Formed by fine clay sediments. The best example, shale and mudstone. Shale and mudstone. So these are the plastic sediment rocks. If you see, Audacious rocks are very coarse grain. చాలా పెద్ద పెద్ద రేణువులతో ఏర్పడుతుంది. Audacious rocks very coarse grain, పెద్ద పెద్ద రేణువులతో ఏర్పడి ఉంటాయి. breccia and conglomerate. అదే Arenaceous rocks వచ్చేసరికి శాండ్, ఇసుక ఉంటుంది కదా, ఇసుక రేణు పరిమాణంలో ఉంటుంది. బౌల్డర్స్ అంటేనే బాగా పరిమాణంలో ఉంటాయి. బౌల్డర్స్, కపుల్స్, పెబుల్స్, గ్రావెల్స్, గులకరాలు ఇవన్నీ చాలా పరిమాణం ఉంటుంది. బట్ వెరాజ్ కమింగ్ టు వాలుకా శిలలు or Arenaceous rocks, sand particles, they are very fine sand size. Then we're coming to Argilaceous, very fine mud stain, అంటే మనం ఏమంటుందని బురద మట్టి అంటాం కదా, బురద మట్టి, very fine grain mud stone. Mudamatti, and shale. So they are very fine clay materials. So they are plastic sediment rocks. Then coming to another hand, non-plastic. Non-plastic అంటే అందులో రాక్ పీసెస్ కానీ వెదర్డ్ ప్రొడక్ట్స్ కానీ వెదర్డ్ రాక్ పీసెస్ కానీ ఉంటాయి, ఫ్రాగ్మెంట్స్ కానీ ఉంటాయి. అన్నీ కూడా the previous rocks are weathered and they are dissolved in the water. They are dissolved in the water. The mineral matter కూడా complete గా they are in the state of dissolved condition. కరిగిపోయిన రూపంలో, కెమికల్స్ రూపంలో. సో అలానైనా ఆ మినరల్ కరిగిపోయి వెదర్డ్ రాక్ పీస్ ప్రతి దాంట్లో ఏముంటుంది, మేడప్ ఆఫ్ ఎలిమెంట్స్. అవి కరిగి వాటి సొల్యూషన్స్ రూపంలో నీటిలో ఉంటాయి. లేదా in another aspect, the remains of plant and animal ones. So after died organisms, so when the organism is laid to die after death, so the plant or any animals, so they are going to dissolve in the water. It is also release some constituents, chemical constituents in the water. సో నాన్ ప్లాస్టిక్ రాక్స్ అనేవి కూడా సొల్యూషన్స్ ప్రిసిపిటేట్ కావడం వల్ల, సొల్యూషన్స్ అనేవి ప్రిసిపిటేట్ కావడం వల్ల కెమికల్ ప్రిసిపిటేట్స్ which are formed, mostly which are we can call it as mostly the abundance of precipitation of the chemical precipitation by the chemical precipitations. So here, based on that, what are the dissolved condition or dissolved solution? The source coming from the chemical and the source coming from organic. So based on that, the non-plastic sediment rocks are again two types: chemically formed rocks and organically formed rocks. So chemically formed rocks are formed by the precipitation of chemical precipitation. And organically formed rocks are formed by the organic precipitation. The source which has come from organic precipitation. So in the chemical precipitate rocks, chemically formed rocks, again four types: carbonate rocks, best example limestone and dolomite; salt rocks, rock salt, gypsum, anhydrite; and ferruginous rocks ki iron stones, and siliceous rocks ki chalk, jasper, flint, and okay. This is siliceous rocks. There are four types. Okay. This is about the what can we call it as the properties of sedimentary rocks. Let us see the remaining third unit in the first flag. Let me see the content. The classification of sediment rocks. This is third chapter. Classification of sediment rocks. And coming to see the sediment rocks properties. Sediment rocks properties. So here, generally, the sediment rocks properties. Once you see the sediment rocks properties, the sediment rocks properties are various ways. So mostly, it depends upon the characteristic features and constituent composition, isn't it? Constituent composition and how it is useful in various sectors. What is the usages, isn't it? Then how it is going to be useful in the varieties. And various properties once you observe. As we know, the plastic sediment rocks properties. Mostly they coming to see their texture. The texture means the size and shape. So here, generally, once we observe the sediment rock properties, the properties it is means, so what are the major characteristic features? It depends upon the constraint mineral assemblage and their usages. Is there any uses of that particular rock? And their structure and texture. Okay. So texture is nothing but a size and shape and arrangement of the mineral grains in the rock. If any texture, if you want to say any rock texture, first you should observe the size, shape, and arrangement of grains in a rock. Rocks అన్ని మినరల్ గ్రెయిన్స్ ఉంటాయి. ఆ మినరల్ గ్రెయిన్స్ అన్ని కూడా వాటి గ్రెయిన్ సైజ్ ఎట్లా ఉంది? I mean కోర్స్ గ్రెయిన్, మీడియం గ్రెయిన్, ఫైన్ గ్రెయిన్, సైజ్ అండ్ షేప్ ఎట్లా ఉందా? షేప్ నథింగ్ బట్ రౌండెడ్, సబ్ రౌండెడ్, యాంగులర్, ఇజంట్ ఇట్? సో అంటే వాటి యొక్క గ్రెయిన్ యొక్క సైజ్ కానీ వాటి యొక్క షేప్ కానీ, ఇజంట్ ఇట్? అండ్ అరేంజ్మెంట్. సో అరేంజ్మెంట్ మీన్స్ నథింగ్ బట్ అలైన్మెంట్ ఇన్ ఏ రాక్. ఆ రాక్ లో ఆ గ్రెయిన్స్ యొక్క అరేంజ్మెంట్, అమరిక ఎలా ఉంది అంటే ఏదేని యొక్క శిల యొక్క రాక్ అంటే శిల యొక్క టెక్స్చర్ ని మనం వైనాన్ని వర్ణించేటప్పుడు ఆ రాక్ యొక్క సైజ్ అంటే అందులో ఉన్న గ్రెయిన్స్ యొక్క సైజ్ కానీ వాటి యొక్క షేప్ కానీ మరియు వాటి యొక్క అమరిక, రేణుల యొక్క అమరికను మనం పరిశీలించాల్సి ఉంది. ఓకే, ఇందులో మోస్ట్లీ సెడిమెంట్ రాక్స్ అన్ని కూడా వాటి గ్రెయిన్ సైజ్ మనకు 0.01 మిల్లీమీటర్స్ నుంచి అప్ టు అబౌవ్ 10 mm వరకు ఉంటాయి. 0.01 మిల్లీమీటర్స్ నుంచి మనకు అప్ టు 10 mm వరకు ఉంటుంది వేరియస్ సైజ్. సో ఇక్కడ sediments contains particles of various size, as you know. So the important factors of the description of sediment rocks, depending upon the size, particles of sediments are classified to pebbles, gravels, sand, and clay, isn't it? And each of these gives rise to a particular type of rock. This classification, as is shown, generally the pebbles, granites, mostly whatever the conglomerate rocks, conglomerate lo unnayo coarse grain అన్ని కూడా మనకు మేజర్ కంగ్లామరేట్ లో గ్రావెల్ అండ్ పెబుల్స్ వస్తాయి. అదే మనకు అరనేషియస్ శాండ్ స్టోన్ శాండ్ సైజ్ వస్తుంది 0.1 to 1 millimeters to 2 millimeter వరకు వస్తుంది. అండ్ అర్జిలేషియస్ రాక్స్ వచ్చేసి క్లే అన్నట్టు less than 0.01 millimeter, దీన్ని మనం less than 1/2 సో డిపెండ్స్ అపాన్ ద వేరియస్ సైజ్ ఆఫ్ గ్రెయిన్స్ present in the sediment rocks. Their texture will be quite different from the one another. See, and also you can see the oolitic structure and the piezolytic structure also we can found in the sediment rocks. So here the chemically formed rocks may contain rounded concretions. If they are of the size of a pinhead, they are of the size. If they are the size of a pinhead, size minimum 1 millimeter size of concretions ఉంటాయి, then the texture of the rock is said to be oolitic structure. అంటే బఠానీ గింజ అంత పరిమాణంలో concretions ఉంటాయి within the structure, we can call it as oolitic. And if they are of the size of a pea, బఠానీ గింజ అంత, so more than that, the texture described as piezolytic structure. Oolitic structure and piezolytic. Oolitic structure is a pinhead, అంటే గుండు పిన్ హెడ్ అయితే కాంక్రీషన్స్ అంటే హోల్స్ లాగా నిర్మాణాలు కనుక ఉన్నట్టయితే అందులో ఓలిటిక్ స్ట్రక్చర్ అంటాం. గుండు పిన్ పరిమాణంలో ఉన్నటువంటి గుండు పిన్ హెడ్ ఉంటుంది కదా, ఆ గుండు పిన్ హెడ్ పరిమాణంలో ఉన్నటువంటి కాంక్రీషన్స్ కనుక ఉంటే ఇఫ్ దే ఆర్ ప్రెసెంట్ ఆన్ ద రాక్, దెన్ ద టెక్స్చర్ వి కెన్ సెట్ టు బి ఓలిటిక్ స్ట్రక్చర్ అండి. అలా కాకుండా ఇఫ్ ఇట్ ఈస్ పీ షేప్, పీ సైజ్ బఠానీ కింద అంత ఉంటే దాన్ని పీసోలిటిక్ స్ట్రక్చర్స్ అంటారు. like nothing and also structures along with textures, structures also we need to study. Structures would వచ్చేసి మనకు stratification, as I already told that Sediment rocks are chiefly occurred in a layered nature. Stratification అంటారు కదా, అంటే లేయర్లుగా ఫామ్ ఏర్పడతా ఉంటాయి సెడిమెంట్ రాక్స్. దిస్ ఇస్ అ క్యారెక్టరిస్టిక్ ఫీచర్ ఆఫ్ సెడిమెంట్ రాక్స్. లేయర్డ్ గా ఫామ్ అవడం అనేది సెడిమెంట్ రాక్స్ యొక్క క్యారెక్టరిస్టిక్ ఫీచర్. బెడ్డింగ్ ప్లేన్స్, బెడ్స్ లేయర్డ్ ఫ్రమ్ స్ట్రాటిఫికేషన్, లామినేషన్, ఇట్ వెరీ ఫైన్ బెడ్స్ ని మనం లామినేషన్ అంటాం. అదేవిధంగా గ్రేడెడ్ బెడ్డింగ్, కరెంట్ బెడ్డింగ్, రెపిల్ మార్క్స్, minor structures, concretions, mud cracks. These are the different rock properties and their structures and textures. You can see in all these various sizes of rocks, we can see in the various ways their structures. You can see the stratification, lamination, graded bedding, current bedding, and ripple marks, and minor structures, mud cracks, trails, concretions. So these are the different variety of structures we can see in the various ways. So these are the different broad scale structures we can see on the sediment rocks. So then coming to the mineralogical composition, based on the mineralogical composition, the relative stabilities of rock forming minerals during the weathering conditions. So generally low stability నుంచి high stability చూస్తే ఆల్విన్స్ అన్ని కూడా వెరీ లో స్టెబిలిటీ ఉంటాయి, అంటే వెదరింగ్ అవడానికి లో స్టెబిలిటీ ఉంటాయి. ఆల్విన్స్ వెరీ లో స్టెబిలిటీ, ఎనార్థైట్. అండ్ కమింగ్ టు ఆగైట్ అండ్ హార్బ్లైట్ అంటే కూడా ఇంటర్మీడియట్ స్టెబిలిటీ ఉంటుంది. ప్లజియోక్లేస్, all feldspars and what you can call it as amphiboles, hornblates. These are all having medium stability. Then coming to high stability, which is quartz, silicate group of metals. Quartz lo high stability ఉంటుంది. These are the rock properties. Okay, this is about the first block. So in this first block we have 3 units. First unit is formation of sediment rocks. Second unit is sediment rocks properties, and third unit is classification of sediment rocks. So we have completed first block. Okay, if you have any doubt, you can raise your question. Okay. Okay, my class is over. Thank you, one and all.